Welcome to Voices About Living, a podcast hosted by therapist Valerie Hamaker, who talks with the brave voices of various individuals who have worked with her as their psychotherapist. These voices share their personal experiences of growth and transformation.
Hi, welcome to Voices About Living. This is Valerie, and I am so excited to have you here today and welcome a friend of mine, a former client. Hi, Michelle. How are you?
Good. How are you, Valerie?
Good. It is so good to have you here to share your journey and experience. And boy, it has been an amazing experience that we've had together. And I have a feeling that a lot of listeners out there are really going to resonate with your story and connect with your growth. So thank you for being here, Michelle.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and just jump in and get started and have you share a little bit about what brought you into my office, what you wanted to work on.
Well, my ex-fiance and I came to you originally because we wanted to do premarital counseling. We wanted to work on our communication, and that's really what we started seeing you in sessions for. And then it evolved to where you and I just ended up in sessions together.
Yeah. So you offered a little bit of a spoiler there. You said your ex-fiance, and you know, that is sometimes what happens, right? And I'm really grateful for the wisdom that the both of you showed in acknowledging that you had a pretty complicated relationship. And while you were engaged and looking forward to being married, I think both of you recognized, okay, things are pretty messy in this relationship. And if we don't deal with these things, we're going to have a complicated marriage, not just a complicated dating relationship. And I think that was frightening to you. And I think you showed an enormous amount of wisdom, Michelle, in wanting to look at what was going on in your relationship because of your own story.
Absolutely. Growing up with a divorced family and always being in the middle of everything, I just wanted to do everything I could in my power to make sure that wasn't going to happen to me and my kids down the road. I only want to be married one time, and that's kind of why I was interested in doing counseling in the first place, just to make sure we were, getting it right. And I didn't expect the outcome to happen the way it did, but that's part of the journey.
Yes. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better, Michelle. It was kind of a journey with a lot of ups and downs. And, one of the things that I'm very aware of on my side as the therapist is, especially when I'm doing couples work, every party involved has to be deeply invested in their own growth for the relationship to work. And sometimes it goes really well and all parties can and do dig deep and deal with their stuff, because that's really ultimately what it actually is all about. I mean, it's an interaction of two individuals, but more so than that, it's actually how each person's individual issues are colliding with the other person's individual issues, which becomes an explosive relationship. And so really the healing of that relationship comes down to an enormous amount of accountability and personal growth. And most of the time, one party is invested, and some of the time both parties are invested, but either way, the outcome usually is the product is actually, it's a happy ending in that it's a healthier ending than it would have been without the therapy, even if it means the relationship ends. Thoughts on that, Michelle?
I agree 100%. I was thinking about this the other day, and I was actually watching My 600-Pound Life, and I'm watching, those people go into the doctor, and I'm like, why? They bring their enabler with them, and their enabler keeps giving them food and giving them food, knowing they're overweight. And I kind of laughed at myself because I used to be the enabler. Half of the problems in my relationship were because of me, because I continued to enable that behavior. And once I read, some books about boundaries and stuff like that, I started feeling like it was okay to set that boundary, because that was for myself and ultimately for, that other person as well.
It is so true, Michelle. It's like, it's kind of a backwards kind of feeling, but the most loving thing we can actually do sometimes doesn't feel very nice. And,
Right.
you're speaking specifically of your story and enabling behaviors, and we're going to go much more deeply into that. But before we do that, I think it would be great for you to talk a little bit about what you brought into the relationship. I loved how you basically opened by saying, you know what, this was not about my finding some guy who really didn't have his crap together. Because I think as we dug into the therapy, what you realize is what all of us should at the end of the day realize is none of us have our crap together. And you had stuff to work on, and you had growth. You didn't really know what you brought and why you behaved the way you did. And so I think it would be great for us to use a lot of this episode today to actually talk about what was it that you learned about yourself that you discovered was this enabling behavior that you were participating in, not only the behavior itself, but why you had that behavior. Let's go way back in time.
Okay. Well, a lot of my enabling would be, I would be very frustrated with something, a task, but I would do it anyway because I would be impatient. Or coming down to money, my ex had different jobs, every few months. And I don't remember a time where in the almost 4 years we were together that there was a long stint where there was actually one job. So there was a lot of back and forth with that. And I was continuing to enable by saying, it's okay, I got it. I'll just work extra hours. And because I thought that's what I was doing to, love someone well. And I was not loving him well by letting him basically sit and be depressed during the day. So that's what I was doing. Yeah. A lot of that comes from what I've learned is my issues with my father growing up and feeling like I needed to, do X, Y, and Z to kind of prove my worth and prove my value. And what started happening is I would spend 2 years or 3 years, however many, building up my own value in my head. And then when stuff hits the fan, I'm looking at the guy going, I've done all this stuff for you for 2-3 years. I've shown you my worth. And I would be so confused of why things weren't going well. And it was just a constant cycle.
Yes. And we discovered that and really dug deeply into that following the kind of the falling apart of the relationship as you were sort of recovering from the broken engagement. Mm-hmm. And what you discovered in this pattern was that you would attach yourself to low achieving men who needed you. And you kind of had learned, and we'll talk about why, you needed to be needed. And you liked being an overfunctioner because it proved your value in the relationship because you didn't see your value in any other way. Mm-hmm. And what we're talking about here to all of you guys out there is this idea that when we have a developmental, like when we have a history, especially with a primary caregiver, where we have been wounded, we map our value and our worthiness from those primary relationships. And then we make choices in future relationships that reflect how we see ourselves from those first relationships. And you said just a touch about this dynamic and how it developed with your own father. And I think it would be great to go a little deeper into that, because I'm 100% sure that there are people out there who are like, well, I'm in these complicated relationships now, but they have nothing to do with anything else. It's just a coincidence, or there's no connection, no relationship. And that is a typical sort of early stance that we take until we start really digging into the fact that there's so many parts of ourselves that are unresolved and that we definitely bring our childhoods into our current relationships. So go backwards if you would. And you said, I did these relationships. I hustled for my value. I overfunctioned. I chose underfunctioners. I don't know why I keep doing this. And here I am again. Let's go back to childhood and talk a little bit more about Dad.
My dad was an alcoholic, did drugs from time to time. And I shouldn't say was, he is an alcoholic. We had a split family by the time I believe I was 2 years old when my parents divorced. And came from a family of 4. So my dad ended up getting married. Later on, got divorced again. And so my senior year in high school is when he got divorced, and I felt this need to move in with him and just show him that I was just craving that relationship as his daughter. I wanted him to want me around. And part of what therapy has taught me is that that's probably not going to happen, and that's okay. It is still sad and it is hard, but it's one of those things I'm learning that it's not about me. It's about him. And, my relationship with him has revolved around a lot of emotional and physical abuse. My senior year, he put his hands on me for the last time, and I left and I moved to the city, and pretty much just started my life at 17 in the city. And I think I've always been overly successful at my job and with my house and stuff like that, because I am subconsciously trying to prove my worth to my dad. So it's weird in a way, because sometimes people ask me who my motivation is, and a lot of times it is him, because I am so gung-ho on trying to prove a point, but it doesn't hurt as much anymore. Yeah. It's more of, if he ever happens to come around and ever happens to want to know what I'm doing, I'll get to show him all the stuff I've been doing.
Thank you for that, Michelle. And I see tears in your eyes as we look at one another, and I'm just moved by your bravery and your courage. And I'm actually really struck by how much you gleaned from the time the gift we had of our time together, and how far you've come. Like, I'm really kind of blown away sitting here listening to your understanding of yourself. I really am, because let me just offer to you guys out there a little bit more about Michelle's story that may help you understand the beauty of this woman and her growth. So as a senior in high school, she moved in with Dad, just wanting to be loved by him, which is absolutely 100% what every little girl wants from their dad. And so, Michelle, the desire and the longing is absolutely normal and appropriate. And also, you didn't have the understanding that this was something that was a fool's errand. And so you spent so much time trying to earn his love. And the most vivid story I have of this, and we can edit this out if you want to, but I remember you're talking about his car running overnight. Can you say a little bit about what you would do there for him to kind of show him how much you loved him, because you wanted him to love you back? Say a little bit about that, if you would.
Yeah. So my dad is also a workaholic, so he is addicted to his job. So he would come home about anywhere between midnight and 2 a.m. usually. Most of the times he was a mix between drunk and tired, too tired to come in. So I would hear him pull up, and I would assume he's coming inside, and I'd wake up a few hours later, because I would usually get up about 5. And I would get ready for school, go out and see that he's, still out there with the car running. So I wake him up, and breakfast is inside, and he just turn the car off, turn it back on, turn around, and go right back into work. But he did that quite often. So I kind of raised myself my senior year and my dad without realizing it. Looking back, it's kind of crazy, because I was the one making the meals and setting out his pills, and, it just stuff you don't really realize until you're looking back that a kid really shouldn't be doing.
Right. I really love how you picked up on the fact that not only were you not being parented, you were taking care of yourself, and you had moved into the parent role to earn your worth. And you wanted Dad to notice and to acknowledge this, and to love you by your bending over backwards to help him through all of his various issues around drug abuse and alcoholism and other things. And you just kept it up until, by the grace of God, you finally had enough, because he wasn't he couldn't give you what you needed, but furthermore, he was abusive to you. And there was finally a part of you that said no more.
Yep.
And and you walked away. The problem, though, is that most of the time when we have histories of trauma and abuse, even though we move out, and in your case, you bought your own home you bought a house as like what, 18-year-old or something like that?
20.
Yeah. So she was just a kid, highly competent, moved into a field where she became an incredible wage earner at a very young age. I mean, Michelle is a very competent human being. And yet, no matter what you did, you couldn't earn your worthiness from other people. And you brought with you this wound that I am not lovable in the eyes, especially of a man. And that's kind of a developmental trauma history right there in a nutshell that we began to better understand. And so fast forward to the current relationship that she came in with. And he said, she really can't tolerate conflict. She shuts down and moves into a shell and builds a wall. And as we unpacked your history, Michelle, what was that like for you to recognize that what he was saying actually made some sense, and that there were reasons for that? Say more, like, what does that bring up in you?
It was definitely eye-opening for me to kind of realize why I would put up the wall, and also realizing that, the hardest part for me was understanding why I was doing it, but then also telling myself it's okay. It's okay to feel this way until I know how to feel any different. That was the hardest part for me, because, in my field, I put on a smile and I go to work every single day, and the people I work with are going through much harder times than me. So I leave all of my stuff at the door every day. Yeah. And so I realized that, the things my ex was talking about, that I process a lot of my work and a lot of other things going on, but I didn't process my childhood, and I didn't understand what happened from my childhood.
Yes.
And so as we were starting to kind of unravel that, it brought me back to a weird place where I was kind of mad all over again, and then sad all over again.
Yes.
But then on the other side, it's feeling like I have grieved that person a lot better on the other side now.
Yes. I'm really grateful you brought that up, Michelle, because, therapy is incredibly transformative. But before we get to the part where we feel the lightness and the load lifting and this sense of like, oh man, I have really been through something and I'm on the other side of it. Before we get there, like you said, like, you have to go through these feelings that, honestly, you said again, but I would venture to say, I don't know that you ever did really let yourself feel the madness, the anger that you should have felt, or the sorrow that you should have felt, because what you did as a tough teenage girl who was high achieving is you shoved it down, you buried it. And
yeah.
So, and yet the problem that we end up learning the hard way most of the time in life is that there is, kind of like there is no away. You can't throw that away and have it be gone somewhere. It actually stays right here with us, and we bring it with us into the next relationship where it becomes problematic. And then it bumps into the unfinished business of the partner. And in this particular case with your ex-fiance, let's just spend a minute talking about how the two of you, and I cared a lot about your ex-fiance. I worked with him too. How were you two almost like the perfect storm coming together? How was it that you chose him it was an ideal combination for this to be kind of a powder keg of disaster?
So how my ex was, he had some similarities to my dad. But I guess the biggest thing, kind of going into that same cycle I was always going into, was that he, wasn't successful yet. He didn't have a place of his own, stuff like that. And so my initial thought is, I'm going to help him be successful. I'm going to give him a place to live and have him earn his keep. And of course, none of that, ended up happening because I was just enabling. But then when we would have issues, even if he was drinking, just casually, I started learning about myself that alcohol shuts me down completely. So we could be having a totally normal conversation, both having a beer or two, but if something ever got escalated, I would immediately shut down because alcohol was involved. And I was worried about the aggressive outcome that would always happen with my dad.
Yes. So stay with that if you would, Michelle, and just say a little bit about what that history was with dad, because this is, again, unresolved trauma that was being triggered in a current relationship. Say a little bit about what was it that your nervous system as a teenager came to expect when dad drank with you around?
The abuse, whether it's physical, emotional, or just, I mean, for me, it was definitely physical, emotional, but also just the lack of presence, whether you're too drunk to get up on your one day off to come watch me run track, or you're too drunk that you don't know where you are. So you call me to come pick you up and you don't even know where you are. Just the lack of presence as well is what really, really hurt me as a kid. When my mom got remarried, I have a stepdad who's wonderful, and he would show up to all of my sporting events, all of my things. And as much as I love him, you still, especially as a woman, you still have that yearning for your dad.
Yes.
It's something that's never going to go away. You just learn how to deal with it better.
Yes. And this certainly, your whole journey validates that as true. You know, long after these people don't necessarily deserve our love and affection, you know, we are still working through that as their children. Right?
Yep, absolutely.
And so because of this history with dad, alcohol was an incredibly loaded subject in your relationship with your ex-fiance. And I have, let me offer a couple of thoughts and feelings from my perspective on this. And yes, he didn't always struggle with quantity, but and to your point, it didn't necessarily matter, even if it was just a manageable amount. It was still triggering. There was a trauma history involved with the consumption of alcohol at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I really, really appreciated what you just said about the fact that not only was it what happened as a child that he did that hurt you, but it was also what happened as a child that he didn't do when he was drunk that hurt you. It was the lack of presence.
Mm-hmm.
That's big.
Yeah. I mean, even before, eventually things with my ex also got escalated and aggressive. But before that, that's what would bring up a lot of feelings for me, is when he would be oversleeping until 1 or 2 in the afternoon every single day. And we would, miss appointments or be late to family stuff. And it just brought back a lot of, just a lot of emotional stuff from my dad. And so that's exactly it. It was, the lack of presence, even just the lack of presence with my ex-fiance of not being up with me on a beautiful morning, listening to the birds and watching the dogs run around or whatever.
Yes.
It's hard.
It was painful for you because you were, your mind, and this is how the mind works, is it was linked. You were having emotions that were linked to childhood emotions of abandonment.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember very vividly in our early time together before the alcohol escalated in your relationship, that I could tell that alcohol as a presence in the relationship was extremely painful for you because of your childhood history where dad was involved. And I think that was extremely important for us to address from very early on, because again, he wasn't necessarily early in our time together struggling with what I would consider alcohol abuse. It was just more the presence of alcohol that made you feel scared.
Right.
And lonely and unseen. And then as time went by and the relationship kind of got more complicated for a variety of reasons, the alcohol itself, actually, the consumption went up and the problems actually started looking very similar to what you experienced in the worst parts of the abuse of your childhood. Can you say a little bit about what that was like for you and how you were managing that? Or what?
I remember specifically one of our sessions where we had been talking about this, and one of my kind of breakthrough moments with you was we were talking about alcohol in general. And I had leaned to my ex and said, I don't want to change you. I don't want you to change for me.
Yeah.
And I just remember that being, because that conversation was hard. It was obviously something that he couldn't just stop. And we had been already in conversation of this feels like a third person in the relationship, yes. Me, you, and the alcohol. And so I just remember how hard that conversation was, because it hit me at that point that, like, this is who you are. This is what you like. You genuinely like the taste of alcohol, and it's not you drinking in general that is a deal breaker, but it's the extra relationship you have going on with it.
Yes.
And so that's where I really started. That was the breakthrough moment where I started working on that. I deserved better. Better in that situation is still what I was thinking at that part is, if I don't want my partner to be drunk 5 nights out of the week, that's okay. I can have that expectation.
Yes.
But I didn't think before that was okay. I normally just went along with, okay, well, whatever. And this is as happy as we're going to get, and we'll just move through.
Yes. And I can't agree enough with you that I remember that very moment and how much of a breakthrough it was, because I think what you were picking up on, you were well into your own growth journey and beginning to realize, because of our really hard work on understanding your childhood and your trauma history, that I think at some point in time early on, you felt like that was all you deserved.
Yeah.
I need to earn my keep, and I need to figure out ways to be lovable by the things I do. And whatever they bring to the table is enough, because I'm not really worth much anyways. And I think the healthier you got, the more you started pausing and going, wait a second, you can do and live and be however you want to live and do and be, but I don't have to buy in.
Mm-hmm.
I need to choose the relationship and the life that I want. And if we're going to do this together, I have some bottom lines, and they're actually, it's acceptable to have bottom lines because I'm worth that.
Absolutely. And everyone's bottom line is going to look different.
Yeah.
And mine is, excessive amount of alcohol. And also, it's in society, it's how some couples, stay married just to stay married, like mine have. And then when my dad got divorced again, him and my stepmom used to fight all the time. And so when you're around that growing up, then you develop this idea that this is just normal. So yeah, he drinks a lot, and we fight a lot, but this is pretty normal overall. So it's not that bad. So once you are just in that situation growing up constantly over and over, that's what you create in your home environment when you're an adult, because whether you realize it or not, it oddly feels comfortable to you.
Yeah.
It's so
what you're used to.
What you helped me do, Valerie, was get uncomfortable with being in that chaos, and just helping me be like, okay, life does not have to be this way. Yes. And it's been scary not living that way anymore, but I just have a whole different perspective now.
I love what you're saying, Michelle, because you're right. It was jarring to you. It's interesting, when we are used to something, it feels comfortable, even if it is the furthest thing from healthy. Mm-hmm. And I can remember saying to the two of you over and over again, if we don't get this figured out, you're going to have 3 kids in a handful of years. And this is going to be a repeat of your childhood, Michelle. And I know that felt kind of dramatic for me to say, but I think in a way it was my way of saying everyone needs to make some choices in this relationship of what they are willing to participate in. And from both sides, both parties need to be brave enough and strong enough to decide what their bottom lines are, and then let the other choose for themselves. Because I remember we talked quite a bit about this idea that, and this is true of the alcohol, but it's true of any other kind of change. We can't change for the other. Mm-hmm. We have to change because that's the kind of person we want to become. Now, the other may benefit from our choices to grow in healthy ways, but the motivation has to come from something that is deep within. And that was true of this situation. And I think you started picking up on this because, you know, when we know that change isn't sustainable when it sort of happens in fits and starts. And then there's a lot of like drama and blaming around the lack of like long-term change. Mm-hmm. And then one other thing I want to ask you about, to touch on something you said a second ago, Michelle, is you said you never, or you rarely had models of what it looked and felt like to be in a healthy, normal, well, I guess not normal for you, but a healthy relationship. Now let's talk for just a moment about, I think there's a little piece of this that is inspiring that I want to have the folks hear. You had a model couple, they're not a perfect couple, but you had a couple in your life that was brought into your life that I think gave you a taste of what healthy relationship could look like. Can you say a little bit about that? Because I think that is important in your growth and development, that you recognize there was something more that you could maybe have.
Yeah, I lived with this family that was a part of the church I was going to. And I ended up moving in with them for about a year and a half before I bought my house. And they were just awesome. You know, their family all around was amazing. They were basically empty nesters when I had come along. So it was perfect for them and perfect for me. You know, it was cool for me just to see a married couple sleep in the same bed. That was something that I just thought most people didn't do anymore. Yeah. And, you know, they obviously had their own little kind of fights and issues, but it was never around me. Yeah. They would handle it maturely, and they just had, I don't even know how to describe it. Just talking about them, they just make me so happy. They, you know, you come home and you're greeted with a hug every day, and a how was your day, and do you need help with anything? And I remember my first Christmas there, and, you know, because we didn't have much growing up, coming downstairs and the couch is full of presents, and I'm having anxiety so bad because I'm immediately thinking I don't deserve this. And I remember crying that Christmas day and begging them to please take some of it back. And then in working with you more, you know, having some of the instances that happened with my ex where he was down and out for a little while, I finally did accept some help from my secondary family and let them bring dinner over, which was a really big step for me because in the past I didn't think I deserved it. And I had always been fiercely independent, and then it would end up come crashing down.
Yes. I'm so struck by the memory of the story about Christmas morning and how we spent time processing this idea that you, in fact, were worthy of just gratuitous generosity. You know, you didn't deserve it. You'd done nothing to earn it. You hadn't paid for it. You were just beloved.
And I was an outsider to them, you know, like I had only been in their family a year, less than a year. And so for them to just take me in with, you know, open arms like that and just treat me as one of their own has been really awesome.
In my mind, it's like this family gave you the imagination for what it felt like to be unconditionally loved and not feel like you had to earn your keep.
And at that time, it was an imagination. And now it feels much more of a reality that could be my husband and my kids someday, having that same type of family dynamic.
Yes, I think I'm so glad we brought that in, because I do think it is true that sometimes there are people who literally have never even witnessed on an up close and personal way what a healthy relationship looks like. Not a perfect relationship, but one that is loving and kind, where there is accountability and forgiveness. And you were lucky enough to spend at least a short period of time in a home that looked unlike anything you had firsthand experienced. and the discomfort that it felt to take that in and to have the way you saw yourself as unworthy challenged by their love for you. And I think that's what kept coming up over and over again in these various relationships was I choose people who need nursing and who need me to overfunction so I feel like I'm earning something, and they need me by their underperformance. And I think once we sort of really kind of unpacked that this was sort of a theme and a cycle, and you started recognizing that, no, I don't need to do that, that my history brings me over and over again to these instances, but I think the healthier you got, the more you were able to pattern interrupt. And after we went through kind of a very, very challenging breakup and worked through that, I think it would be great to talk a little bit about where you are now as we close our time together.
Well, now I'm in a very good and healthy relationship. I was talking to him actually the other day, and just was like, I can't believe we've been together for 5-ish months now, and we have yet to really have a fight. In my last relationship, we were fighting every day by now. But we have both done a lot of personal growth, and that's the biggest difference. My ex and I, we are just on different paths in life, and doesn't mean he's not a great guy. We just weren't right for each other.
Yeah.
And my boyfriend now has gone through something similar in the last couple years. And so I was very happy that I chose him, because he's actually been able to help me a little bit with personal development books and making sure we're both keeping each other on track and not repeating past things we've done. And so I have a good relationship with my family. I feel like it's gotten a lot better. I think in the past I was pretty closed off from spending a lot of time with them because I didn't want to tell anyone what was really going on at home. Yeah. I was so dead set on it working out that I didn't want to tell anyone the details of what was really happening, because I didn't want them to have a different opinion of him. Yeah. And so now I'm kind of out of hiding, I guess you could say. Mm-hmm. And I'm seeing my family more. And I've kind of flip-flop. I've noticed I used to be a workaholic because that was kind of my escape from home. Yeah. And now it's the opposite. I'm for the first time in my life, I've shut my work phone off this entire week.
Wow.
I have never done that in the last 10 years, never done that. So I've been very proud of myself for doing that, and setting a boundary with my work, my boyfriend, everybody. It's been the healthiest way to be.
That's amazing. That's amazing. As we close, Michelle, can you just say a little bit about what is the greatest gift that your therapy experience has taught you about yourself?
I can only pick one. Really hard.
Whatever comes up first or second.
My first thought is I just remember crying, even though I was like, okay, I'm going to save a little money now, but I love Valerie so much. And I remember crying when she's like, I don't need to see you anymore. And I'm like, wait, but something's wrong with me still. Yeah. I just gained, I think the biggest two things come up for me. Mm. I gained the understanding of what I am actually feeling.
Wow.
So the actual, the emotions are all more understanding now, where yes. I can tell now what I'm actually feeling. It's not anger. It's not sadness. It's not happiness. There's something deeper that I'm feeling.
Yeah.
That has been very, very helpful. And the other thing is, like I mentioned earlier, that it's okay. Even though I'm happy now, there's still some hard days, of course. I still ended an engagement. I still was supposed to be getting married, this Saturday. And so it's it is hard some days, but it's okay to feel that way.
Yes.
And having people on your tribe, that can just root you along, and you're having a crap day. It's okay. You don't have to be happy 100% of the time. And I think that is the biggest thing I've learned, is that it's okay to not be okay sometimes.
That's beautiful. What you're saying to me is that this journey has taught you, first of all, to feel your feelings and to accept that feelings come and feelings go. And that
you have to allow yourself to feel that.
Yes.
And process it and get through it and talk yourself into something or out of something or whatever you need to do. But you can't shove it down. You have to feel it.
Beautiful. Beautiful. One last question for you as we close today, Michelle. I guess I'm just wondering if you could share, what if someone out there is listening and they're scared to even think about this idea of like, maybe what I'm going through now correlates with a really tough childhood and I don't want to talk about it. It's overwhelming. It's too scary. It's too much. What could you say to them about that fear? Because that's your story.
Mm-hmm. My biggest thing, one, I'd be like, call me. We can talk, I'll get you connected. I got this girl, Valerie. I'll get you connected. But I think a lot of what we did was going back to the basics. And so going back to the basics of why, like, yes, I have trauma from my childhood, but why?
Yes.
And starting to dig into that. And, I've done a lot of pros and cons lists lately with things. And that's helped me a lot too. But going back to the basics, and like you've taught me, you have to heal as a little girl.
Yes.
And be a little girl, or you're never going to be a little girl inside and get out of that little girl, area. So it's on the outside, I have all this good stuff going on, but in the inside, I was still a 10-year-old girl.
Yes.
And so I just think if you're being scared is probably a good spot to be, because it's a starting point. You've already kind of accepted that what I went through isn't okay. I just don't know where to go from here.
I love that. Thank you so much for that, Michelle. So 2 things that I'm thinking about in response to what you said is, you are absolutely right. When we have a childhood trauma history, which just is another way of saying when we've been through very challenging things as children, there are parts of ourselves that stay frozen on the inside. Mm-hmm. And so I really liked how you articulated that, yes, you've got a grown-up woman's body and face, but in many ways, there are parts of you that are very little and young. And to the second thing that you said, those parts of you cannot be connected with and healed unless you're not alone anymore in them. Mm-hmm. The reason why it was so overwhelming and scary in the first place is because you were not loved well in situations and in the presence of somebody that could have and should have loved you well. And so you felt, that's what trauma is by definition. It's overwhelming feelings in the face of isolation. And so healing of trauma is being able to handle those feelings in the presence of someone who loves and adores you. And in this case, it just happened to be me.
I'm so grateful for that.
And it worked. And it's just gives me no end of joy to see where you are. And we haven't worked together for a period of time, and to just get on this call with you and see your eyes glowing and your face shining and just happy and fulfilled and thriving. It's the greatest gift that you could give me, that you were brave enough to go through this with me. And so thank you so much, Michelle.
Thank you for everything you've done for me, and you're with me every day.
Likewise. So we'll go ahead and conclude this time together. And for those of you out there listening, I'm fairly certain that you have been touched by this time that Michelle and I have spent together, your bravery and courage to not only go through this experience, Michelle, but to be able to talk about it. Because I think there are a lot of people out there that have histories that in one way or another are going to feel very similar to what you have been brave enough to share, and how you are giving them hope that it can be worked through and overcome, that healing is not only possible, but very likely, if you have the bravery to seek help. So
Absolutely.
So those of you out there who are listening and who have been touched, I invite you to please share this with anybody in your circles that may be impacted by what we've talked about today. Please hit the subscribe button. And also, it's very meaningful to me as a podcaster and someone who's trying to spread goodness in the world if you would subscribe and write a review and rate this podcast. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Michelle. And we will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Voices About Living with therapist Valerie Hamaker. If you found this podcast meaningful, please share it. You never know who might be searching for hope that personal and relational healing is possible.